Okay. So like to welcome the June Rail Committee meeting to order, call to order. Can we get a roll call
Chair Key,
here?
Greg Conlon is not here. Jim Jans,
Here, Greg told me that he was going to try to participate by Zoom because he's not feeling well tonight.
yeah, no, I got that as well. He's not online yet.
Got it.
Jack Ringham. Here. Jim Massey.
Here.
John Malbec.
Here.
And we have our council liaison, Vice Mayor Hawkins Manwellian.
Here. Welcome. So we got that done, and next item is approval of minutes. Are there any additions, changes?
So moved.
First, do I have a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any noes or abstentions? Okay, it passed unanimously. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Do you have a hard copy of the agenda by any chance? Yes, for.
Pass it around.
Yeah.
You got it in very little column? Yeah.
The councilwoman would like one too. One more time.
If
Oh,
you
she would
have it,
like
I'll
a
take-
copy
Oh,
too.
sure.
I'll take one too. Let's pass them around.
It's a very popular.
Did you put in yours out? I couldn't get mine.
Yeah,
Okay.
so just for informational purposes, there's an HTML agenda, which is the live linked one. But there's also a link to a PDF document, which is what I printed for you. So it looks a little different.
And
When I did that, I got it in a column about that wide.
Did the same thing. Yeah, that's what I had.
Okay. Oh, we
Must be the app.
have,
I missed public comments, so I should probably open it up for that.
I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, Chair, we have Greg Conlon joining via Zoom.
Okay, great. So are there any public comments that anybody wants to make? No? Okay. And then we have committee and staff report comments. I guess that's on, is that supposed to be that early on the agenda, but I see it after the public comments.
Apologies.
It's a little out of order. Oh, we can say that to the end in case there's any comments. So why don't we begin with item number 2, the Watkins Avenue safety improvements. Staff has a summary, a report.
Yeah, so just real briefly, activities have started for the construction of the Watkins Avenue crossing improvements. Some of the work has been intermittent, but they have started progressing. They are actually planning on getting set to pour the foundations or set the foundations for the pedestrian scale lighting tomorrow. And they'll be back on site. So they've started initially with marking of utilities. There's been some pre-construction meetings with PG&E for activities, but I think they started pouring the retaining walls on the backside near the channel for grading out the improvements and setting the signal poles. So activities are ongoing. We anticipate that they'll be able to complete their work per their schedule.
Okay, excellent. Are there any questions or any comments from the committee?
What is the scheduled completion?
December. That's as per our MOU, it's December. So, I mean, this contract, I think their contractor is going to be working through October, but then there's activities that Caltrain and their signal contractor have to do following.
Any public comments on this item? No? Okay. If there's nothing else, we can move on to item number 3, the Atherton Caltrain Station remodel project.
Sure. Happy to report that the council approved the award of a construction contract for the remodel of the station. We're still trying to finalize execution on the construction contract. There's been a couple of hiccups related to insurance documents, but we had our pre-construction meeting with the contractor and the architect yesterday. So we're getting ready to get started. Once the agreement is signed, they'll have 10 days to get started on the work. So they're gearing up on getting their submittals ready. They have a couple of clarifying items that they want to discuss with the architect with regards to like the windows and doors so that they can get those submittals in and the orders placed.
And so starting, they're thinking of by the end of this month.
By the end of this month, construction will be started and the goal is to be substantially complete prior to the 100th year celebration that we have here in September. And they've been advised of that timeline.
Okay, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be sort of a one of the highlights of the
Yeah.
centennial.
Can I update on the other?
Yes, please.
And simultaneously, we hired a video company to do 2 videos. One is on the history of the town, and that'll be shown at the September opening. And the second, and will also be inside the train museum. There's a second one that's specifically about the history of the train. So I've been reaching out to the local community to try to find people who might have, videos, might have model trains. I met with the people that run the model train museum that's in Menlo Park. The stuff that we're doing is G scale, which are bigger ones. And if you guys haven't seen a proposal, we have a proposal that has some drawings and stuff of what we're proposing to do inside. So it's just a rough draft. It's, we still need to flesh it out. And I've reached out to Caltrain to try to meet their historian and see what archive material they have. So we can try to get some stuff to go inside the museum. And the video's happening. They're hoping to shoot some of the video station, which may now happen like Thursday, because it's going to be under construction. So that was a little thing we didn't realize, that it would be under construction. They want to do like the drone flyovers and make it look really good. So
Okay.
They may do that this Thursday, but maybe the weather will be nice. We'll see. So that's happening. So we've been really doing a lot of outreach. The Luger family today offered to donate or loan one of their Model Gs so we're starting to collect the pieces. And I'm hoping to write some pieces that'll go out either in the Athertonian or in the weekly thing, calling anyone who's interested in train history in particular, who may have images that we can use or models or want to participate. And in the future, what we're going to have to do is figure out, and this is something I wanted to send out to you guys. I know this is remotely kind of stuff you do here, but eventually to run that, we're going to have to set up a nonprofit, because we won't have someone to run it. So we want to set up a nonprofit that will then, have like a little box with small donations, but that can run it and maintain it. And so I have no idea how to do that. So I've been talking to George about how to start that process, because he was in Tiburon, where they have a train museum there, and was actually on that board, that organization. So he's done it once before. So we will be reaching out. So if anyone has any connections to anyone who's a train collector, has train photos, knows train history, please send them my way.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Diana, I was told a long time ago by Malcolm Dudley, who was on the city council for 20 years and so forth, and knew a lot about trains, that the Atherton station was once used in a TV commercial, like as a kiss and ride type of, people. I think it was a Buick commercial.
I think it was Ford.
You think it's, okay, did you ever see it?
I find that.
No, but I think it was Ford.
But if somebody could ever find that, that would be really cool.
That's awesome. See, that's
Yeah.
exactly the kind of thing I
Yeah.
need to hear about. So how would I even find that? I will try.
I don't know how you find
Doing
it.
a search on the internet,
On
but
YouTube,
Yeah.
maybe someone uploaded every Ford commercial possibly, or Buick commercial.
uh,
You want to look through many, maybe that's, yeah, They wouldn't identify it though as shooting in Atherton, so that would be kind of, you'd
Yeah.
probably have to watch every commercial.
But that would be
Unfortunately.
interesting if
Yeah.
we can find that. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, so anything like that that comes to mind, anybody you know who's interested, who has stuff or wants to help, send them my way because we've been working on it. We were, spent the day looking at the stuff. We're going to digitize the database. What's happening up there?
Oh, Greg just wants to record and
Okay.
it's just.
Um, Yeah, so I spent the day pulling out the train station historical pictures and we're going to digitize those and that's going to be part of the
Okay,
process.
cool.
We'll create an archive that will be available to the public through our library eventually. So in the process, we're trying to do it so we create an asset that's usable more than one way.
Since the train station is kind of a museum and the educational part of, Atherton, the town, could we use some of the excess library funds to run it?
I've been asking that question. That would be incredible. And in
I'd
fact,
say that, I'm going to say that conversation is outside the purview of the committee.
Yeah.
Okay. The parliamentarian has ruled.
that would be a great
Um,
idea.
Are there any public comments for this item? Any other comments?
Can I speak?
Go ahead, Greg.
See, I have a friend, Bruce Battles, who spends full time fixing model trains. So he lives in Menlo. I can give you his contact info.
Please do. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
And any,
Some years ago, the Caltrain puts out a paper schedule and they have pictures on the front, right? Sort of a cover to it. And shortly after they stopped using the station, the picture showed the Atherton station with a train streaming through it. And it was photographed so that you got a sense that the train was sort of. the way
Not
they
stopping.
make it look like. And I was at one of the joint power board things and I said, I thought this was sort of ironic. Now that we're no longer relevant to the whole thing, we're on the front cover. If we can find that.
I will. That's a Caltrain publication?
It's
It's a
one of
schedule,
their-
isn't it?
One of their schedules.
Oh, a schedule.
recently
Okay.
published?
We still have it.
Oh, if you have it, find it for
Taking
me.
notes to look for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any public comments on this? Nope.
There was some discussion about how to depict the history of the train in Atherton and what to include and not include. Like, for example, the lawsuit that we had and some of that and how to depict that. We've opted to not include that for now. So
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing with the station. It's certainly a lot.
it's fun.
It's appreciated.
Interesting.
We'll move on to item 4, Caltrain update.
Sure, we have a couple of items to report. I think we have a referenced article that was sent out to the committee and is linked to the agenda with regards to issues that may delay construction on the electrification project. But I'm assuming that you've noticed over the last week or so, there's actually been activities related to the electrification project ongoing. I think they've been working at the Watkins Crossing this week to set poles and work on signaling and other things like that. So activities are starting to move forward here, which is good to see.
Got a bunch of stuff parked in front of my house these days. I guess they're doing something.
And then so there, I think we mentioned in previous meetings that Caltrain has started an effort to look at the corridor in a holistic manner with regards to grade crossings. And so over the last, say they started the study, I don't know, several months back, in terms of trying to figure out ways to set priorities and how you dictate, how you look at the system holistically, where crossings should be grade separated, migrating into discussions of possible funding scenarios. Right now, it's more of an ad hoc system in terms
I heard
of
it a long time ago.
Greg, if you're intending to speak, let us know. Otherwise, if you want to mute yourself, you can do that as well. And so it's been more of an ad hoc approach, driven more jurisdictionally in terms of jurisdictional priorities and jurisdictional funding to get things started, and then jurisdictions applying for grant funds, which is really piecemeal. And so the effort is to try and they're looking at other funding models as to how, if they looked at it holistically, prioritization, as well as funding, who's going to be responsible for what aspects of the project. Obviously public outreach locally would be done on the local level, but what aspects of pre-design, design, environmental analysis should be done by the local agency versus Caltrain. And when it gets into construction, how is that management going to happen? So that process is ongoing. There were a couple of workshops held last month. One at the staff level for the jurisdictions along the corridor, and the other with the LPMG representatives for each community to look at the corridor at a higher level, and looking at where different types of crossings may make sense. And that would be, for example, a full grade separation, a bike and ped only crossing, or complete crossing of an intersection. And so I think at our last meeting, we had the presentation by Palo Alto, and they were actually looking at closing off one of the crossings, I think. I know Menlo Mountain View is looking at closing off a crossing as
Yeah.
well.
I think to make it like bike and pedestrian only.
Well, I say, so there's that, but I think downtown
Castro Street, I think.
downtown Mountain View, Castro Street, they're looking at completely
Oh,
closing.
maybe they're doing do the pedestrian underneath or something like that.
So in any event, they were seeking input from different representatives with regards to what things might look like. Unfortunately, they were looking at potentially changing the Watkins Crossing to a bike and ped only, which I don't think works for the town. And so I think the feedback that staff had given is that you need to kind of think about this a little more. One of the other items that was raised, at least on the staff, at the staff meeting, was once you start elevating certain sections, you may need to, it's not like you can just, I'm gonna say, if you have a crossing nearby, you're already elevated, so you may just need to keep the next
Elevating.
one as a grade separated crossing as well, and not just cut it off.
May I ask, what is the need to have a grade separation at every crossing? If
They are looking 25 plus years down the line is what they're trying to do.
thinking that everything's going to be high speed enough that they're going to have. to
No,
fix
they're
it.
thinking from a safety perspective that I'm gonna say, from a safety perspective, not having cars intersecting with trains is a safer thing. And so they're looking in the far future, where would we like to be? Or where should rail look to be in the next 25, 50 plus years? Okay, and so as they look at that, it's going to be looking at that, and then how do we get there? And so I know the vice mayor went to a meeting, was it last week?
Yes, and it was in Palo Alto, sorry. And one of the things that was interesting, you had told me about the Watkinson change. So what they did, they had this big model. So the goal is to get the different areas to sit and talk about this, how would we do this in the future? And they were talking about one of the problems with staying the same, which I said would, if it was our choice to shut down the street or stay the same, I'd say stay the same. And they said the problem is that they're expecting to increase the number of trains so much that the downtime on our gates would make it like it's blocked the street. So that was their thought process. So they put out this big long map and they had little push pins, colored push pins. In the city of Atherton, they had two, and one was a closure and one was was it elevated? I don't remember what the other one was.
It was your standard grade separation where they elevated the trees.
Elevated. And so they wanted us to sit and negotiate with the people about, well, and I said to them, the real problem with this is there's no way a human brain can look at this whole thing, because if you close one station, you're going to change the traffic pattern. And even if we looked at just ours and said, we don't want to change, but then they change something right to the north or south of us, it will change all our commute and motion patterns. So I suggested that they do a computer model where they can model the whole thing out, because if you're going to make those decisions, once you close something, it changes the traffic pattern for one, and how the loads that are going to be. And if you increase the number of downtimes on that gate, that's going to change it again more. So without a computer model to see how that's going to work, I don't understand how they would expect anyone to look at the map like that and understand how it will work going forward. So they wrote that down diligently. Whether that will happen, I don't know. But it did trouble me how much downtime they're anticipating. The problem was the timeline on when that's going to be. It wasn't at all clear of how soon they're going to double the numbers. But from what they implied, that as soon as next year, the number of trains is going to significantly increase. I'd never heard that before. So
Well, if I can interrupt, that's interesting because they just asked the FTA if they can, they're required by the grant they got to pay for electrification and all that they run six trains an hour? But they're asking the FTA, can we go back and only run 4 because we don't have enough demand to run 6 trains an hour?
their numbers went way down during
Yeah.
COVID and they didn't pick back up.
Yeah,
So that's the problem.
and if they don't come back up, there's not going to be a lot of trains.
Yeah, and once they start shutting things down, if you look historically, I was just looking at this today. In the past, when they shut the whole train down for 2 years to do the baby bullet speed thing. And prior to that, they had something like 10.3 million people ridership. They closed it down for 2 years and it took years and years before it ever came back up. So if they're going to start doing that going forward, I don't know how they will plan it. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But the asking individual cities to negotiate with the other cities. And then there was a big consensus that what would be better would be to ask for state money. And if you ask for state infrastructure money, that means we have to have a cohesive plan and go as a group, which is not, like you said, it's going right now. Some cities are building, some cities are not building. And it's kind of a mismatch. And I'm new to it, so I don't totally understand the history of it, but it doesn't seem totally organized to me, in my personal opinion. But it was an interesting exercise. They didn't get very far. They're going to send us out a report of because it was in different groups. They'll give us a report of what everyone said and what at least the consensus was of the various cities coming into it.
Yeah, I'm just going to interject one thing. One of the items that they missed, at least for us, is routing and alternate routes. And so if a crossing is closed, and the one that they were pointing at was Watkins, it was Watkins. And we have issues with that because that's our only park. We need to have access to it. Having PD or others drive around to get to it makes it a little challenging. But the map that they had for us, and I made a comment on it, so I don't know if they changed it for yours, was that they had an alternate traffic route being McCormick, but McCormick doesn't allow cars to go through. And so what it means is that you're going down Fair Oaks to get to Middlefield, go Middlefield and come up, or you're going up to El Camino. And that, you're talking about rerouting folks about a mile to get from one side to the other, which is a bit excessive. There is no crossing nearby to the north of us that would be impacted because the next one to the north is Fifth, which is already grade separated.
Right.
The next one to the south is Encinal, which I don't think people would route necessarily to, well, they couldn't route to Watkins if they closed it off, but they'd likely go the next block to the south as opposed to coming north to get around if that one were to be closed.
Yeah, I am a little surprised that Watkins is the closed one because it would be something that they might do in Encino's, grade separate that. And maybe that adversely affects Watkins and maybe they close that, but then how are they elevating?
It's not a matter of elevating or not elevating. They're looking at what are the expenses and where it
Oh,
makes
okay.
sense to have access. So they weren't doing a full, in ours, it wasn't a full closure of Watkins.
Yeah.
It was a bike and ped only crossing.
Okay, okay.
Alex,
Go ahead, Jim.
I have a question. You kept referring to they.
Caltrain.
Who were they you were meeting with? Were they representatives from other cities? Were they trained people?
It was hosted by Caltrain and it was the representatives to the what's it called? Local
Policymakers group.
policymakers group. So each city has a liaison, like I'm the liaison for this and I'm the liaison for that as well. So they had people from Palo Alto and all over the place, you know, representing their towns and their.
Okay, and
perspectives.
in the quote negotiation that they want, who would we be negotiating with? People like you, politicians from the other cities, or the Caltrain people, or I don't quite
It was just,
understand.
it was an exercise
Okay,
where they were trying to do an exercise to see what we would come up with for ideas.
Okay.
So the goal was to collect what were our concerns. So, you know, they asked like, why would you not want to close that? And I said, well, we have emergency response across, you divide the city in half. And they did give these maps of each of the cases it was no less than 7 minutes supposedly. If they blocked it, you had an alternative route that was not more than 7 minutes to get around. But if it's on a major thoroughfare and blocking off major infrastructure and we only have 2 main streets, it doesn't make sense. So, but the goal was really to see what our issues were from each of the towns and how we'd address it. And some of the towns were welcoming it and some were not, and it kind of depended. The other thing that came up to me and again, I'm novice to this, but there was one street that looked like we really should be discussing it with Menlo Park. And Menlo Park is making the decision on that one. So it was considered theirs, but the street, we have as many, I don't know the name of it.
Encino, is it?
Not sure.
First one out of Atherton and.
I think so,
Yeah,
but
because-
we have actual more houses on that street
Yeah,
than
if
they
you go
do, but
east,
it's
you'll hit-
considered theirs. And they're the ones who are, you know, discussing what to do with it. And it seemed to me that seemed we should be negotiating that together since we had as many residents on that street as they did. But I don't know how this is going for. It's just an exercise. It's
Okay.
not going to the next. There's a bunch of-
Mike, I just want to know the people involved, and
yeah.
I already have a level of trust issue. Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing I think they will all agree on, underground the entire thing. Problem is they don't have to pay for it if you're asking the cities, but I think all the cities would prefer if Caltrain were underground it up the entire way.
Right. Well, the answer to get to that kind of a
Guided.
decision is if we were to go for state funding,
Yeah.
state infrastructure. And in order to do that, we all have to come in as a group, which is not the way it's done right now. And to me, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
If that's the end goal, that's the best for everyone.
Yeah, this will be on another hour.
I want some dinner.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I did have one. And public comments? Do you have go ahead.
I think the Watkins crossing, that's pretty well used, especially during the school week. There's like many people going in like Encino or even in school who like drive by there every single day. And so if you're gonna reroute all those people, that's like gonna be huge. Huge.
I think staff wants you to talk into the microphone.
Yeah, because that was a good comment. We want to catch it for the record.
So if you were to change the crossing for on Watkins, the railroad crossing, to not have cars, that would be a huge infrastructure change because you have many students going to like Encino Elementary School or Menlo Atherton High School, like every day on that road. And so changing that would then have to reroute all those people around there, which there's already quite a bit of traffic going to both of those schools. So it'd be even worse. So.
Agreed.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, so does the report on the electrification project delay caused by Belfort Beatty's continuing screw ups, is that going to affect the Watkins our Watkins project at all?
It shouldn't.
No, okay.
There was one other thing that they talked about that was shocking to me that you guys may already know, but they were saying that from 2017, when they started the project, they had a 30% increase in construction costs in just that time frame. And I thought that was a very interesting statistic to share. That was eye-opening.
One thing I wanted to point out, Caltrain just passed their budget, their 2-year budget recently. And one of the things they're going to pay $80 million for is a battery EMU. Now, why do they need a battery EMU? Well, to get to Gilroy, there's not going to be any overhead wires. So they need some solution for getting to Gilroy. The state's requiring that by 2030, you're going to have low emission trains. And so the current diesel trains aren't going to fit the bill. They could possibly buy new trains that are lower diesel emission, but they decide to put a bet on batteries. So I find that interesting because many years ago, we asked them to consider batteries, and now they're going to look into batteries and see if they can use battery powered locomotive to get all the way to Gilroy and back.
Be one hell of a battery.
Alex, would they use those units on the entire route, or would you have to at
It's-
San Jose?
I didn't get into that level of detail, but it's primarily to serve the Gilroy route, and it's just for one train at this time. It's kind of it's $80 million for one train, so. So that'll be their prototype. Let's see.
Or empty cars.
Why don't we move on if there's nothing else for item 5? We'll move on to, or was that item? That was item 4. So why don't we move to item 5?
Well, could I have a speak on that last item?
Sure, go ahead, Greg.
You know, they did that exercise like 20 years ago, and they had a lot of detail. I mean, they had maps and schemes at every location that you're talking about. And I know that Pat Burt was there, Jerry Carlson was there, and I'm sure Jack Reagan was there, but there's a lot of detail that was developed that somebody should at least look at to see what they thought of to doing 20 years ago, whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think Jack did a report on that many years ago. I remember now, before I was on this committee, but I think I attended the or was it? No, it wasn't you, Jack. It was our
Paul
chair.
Jones.
It was Paul, yeah.
Yeah, Paul Jones did an extensive report on the effect of downtime on traffic.
Really?
Yes. And, basically said it wouldn't work.
Okay, let's move on to item 5.
Thank you, Chair. As noted in the agenda, there are various articles regarding the cost of high-speed rail and the continuing escalation thereof. Don't really have much to report in terms of activities on the high-speed rail corridor. There's not much that's happening in our area.
Okay. Any questions or comments? And anything online? Okay. If not, we'll move on to item 6, and I think that's mine, unless staff has anything they want to share.
Again, there's articles referenced with regards to quiet zone activity in Menlo Park. We talked about rail crossings in neighboring jurisdictions as part of the ongoing effort for the, what do you call it, the corridor study.
Yeah.
And so, Chair, if you have other items to add.
Sure. Just an update from Menlo Park, which is looking into doing quad gates themselves. So they did a city survey of just asking the residents what you want us to focus on. And the number one request was a quiet zone for their 4 crossings that they have at 41% of residents. So there's an organized group of people that, kind of are pushing for this quiet zone as a quality of life issue. And so what Menlo Park has done is they're putting funds toward doing quad gates or they're spending some money in order to do some investigation about what can they do to get quiet zone compliant. So it's most likely going to be quad gates, although it sounds like they don't need to quad gate every single crossing. They can quad gate 2, and that would make all 4 of them safe enough to be under the QZRI, the Quiet Zone Risk Index. And that makes it okay to have one. The risk is that if the risk index changes, that you could lose your quiet zone. But right now, if they just quad gate 2 of them, it'll be enough. And the cost for quad gating is kind of expensive. They were seeing that, let me see if I can get the numbers in. Wrote too many notes, so I've kind of lost it in here. I think it was something like 2 million each or something like that, up to. So they're kind of worried that, do we have $8 million to spend on 4 crossings? And they said, okay, let's just pay for 2. Yeah, 8 million for 4 crossings, and then 4 million if they just quad gate 2 of the crossings. 1 million for design that they need to do, and then, plus 7 for the actual construction, things like that.
Is that pretty consistent with what we're paying in Watkins? What they were paying in Watkins?
It was, I think the construction work is just over $1 million altogether. I mean, they have a couple of different contracts going. One is the one for, with Granite Rock, which I think is around 700 and something. And then they have their signal folks that are doing additional work. But our crossing is small. And so the others have other activities in and around them. And I think the roadways are a bit wider.
Ravenswood is wider, but Encinal is not that big. It's also possible they're taking account of, they're not doing it today, but
Yeah,
in
that's
a few
definitely
years.
something to be considering. If you go out any period of time, construction costs will escalate.
So, their council kind of balked at that $2 million of crossing number, especially because it's kind of a new budget priority that they hadn't accounted for before. It's not existing. So they're going to spend some money on this upcoming year's fiscal year's budget to do some investigation, to do, I think, just the design work. And then when they get that done, they'll consider it in future budgets if they have the extra 3 to 7 million to spend on the rest of it. So that's where they're going. And then Palo Alto also participated in this kind of evaluation because Menlo Park's got 4, and then Palo Alto Avenue, which is right after that, is pretty close by. And actually making that a quiet zone is actually much simpler because they have medians already. So they just need to raise the median and extend it out. So they could get a quiet zone a bit cheaper once they extend those medians.
Sunwood Street.
This Palo Alto Avenue, this is where you turn,
Well,
basically Alma, where Palo Alto becomes Alma. Yeah. And a lot of the residents there also really want it because it's University Avenue, so it's pretty dense, and they want the horns to stop.
They have to replace that bridge. It'll take them a couple of years and the horns will stop.
Yeah, that's another issue, but yeah. Let's see, is there anything else on this of interest? So basically they'll do the study in Menlo Park, and then they'll see how much it's going to cost based on their evaluation, and then we'll see if the next fiscal year budget they can pay for part of it or all of it. That's about it.
Talking of quiet zones, as I recall, the forgetting about putting the quad gates in, the procedure, the process of applying for a quiet zone, getting everybody to sign off on it takes a while. So have we started that already with the assumption that we'll have quad gates, or do we have to wait till those gates are in to start it?
I'm going to refer this item. I'm going to talk about it going back to the Watkins crossing so that we have it
Yeah.
covered in the agenda.
That's fine.
So to answer your question, we did issue a notice of intent quite some time ago with the intent to establish the quiet zone after completion of the crossing improvements. And so once that work is done, we will be going through a process to officially enact that quiet zone.
Some other notice, right?
It's another notification requirement, but we did start that process.
I mean, Caltrain sort of fought it at Fair Oaks Lane. They didn't, I don't know if they'll fight it here.
No, it's in our MOU, so they are supporting it.
But I think the town files the notice and there's something like 60 days of comment or something like that.
Well, it takes time, but.
Yeah.
Caltrain dragged their feet on it for
But-
quite a while. This,
The FRA usually just grants it to the municipality or whoever's requesting it if it qualifies. And I mean, the comments, I don't believe, we did not stop our Fair Oaks quiet zone, even though we had,
it didn't stop it. I'm just saying it delayed the process for quite a while. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
even know what quite a while means.
Yeah.
I remember Narissa Dexter was fighting him tooth and nail.
Yeah, we don't anticipate that.
any other comments on item Watkins Crossing? If not, we'll go back to the beginning in the committee and staff reports and comments. Are there any committee and staff report comments? Seeing none, no public comments. Future agenda topics. So we'll meet next in September. Are there any topics that you guys, anybody wants to get covered in September?
You know, I would like to at least mention the accident in India. I'm not sure that we have a connection there or not, but there was a couple things in the newspaper article that disturbed me. One was that the switching system failed. And I assume that that's not a unique system. It's probably a worldwide switching system. So if there's any feedback on what switching system that is and whether Caltrains or high-speed rail is looking at that system, then I think at least they ought to be aware of it. And the other thing was the article in the newspaper said that the engineers
Uh-oh, we lost Greg. Okay,
Thanks, Greg.
hopefully we'll get him back. But we're kind of at the end too. Next meeting date is September 5th. I don't know, should we give him a moment or do you guys,
You can give them another moment
Okay.
if there's any other,
any other member comments? Yeah.
Does anyone know if the technology that they have in place there in India, I had to assume it was old crusty stuff and now what we have, I hope we have better stuff. Does anyone know?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that I don't think we have purview over the switching system that Caltrain uses.
So it's not something we have to worry about. Is that you're making me, we don't have to worry about it, right? It's-
Well, as a local policymaker, you have a bit more influence than us, but.
Well, I did ask the question when they had that toxic spill in the Midwest.
Okay.
Because that was, and I asked whether or not we had toxic stuff in place and they did assure me, and George brought out a book this thick that has all the different icons that are supposed to be on the outside of a train when you have a spill. And he walked me through our emergency response. So we do have emergency response set up. And we do have, there's a whole iconography to know what the substance is and who responds and stuff. So I did actually ask that. So when this stuff comes up, it does make sense because, you forget about it and then something that stays under the radar until it's not. So at least that one we're covered. I didn't ask about the switches though. So that's a good question. Maybe we'll ask that next.
If I remember, there's there's different, I'm gonna confuse myself. There's different, yeah.
Oh,
Robert's saying,
I'm
don't
gonna
start,
say
don't
that,
start.
I say,
Okay.
we can't have the discussion about the actual item, but if you want to have a
That's-
discussion as to whether or not it should be on the next agenda.
And we can
Yeah,
talk about it
we've got-
after this meeting.
In the parking lot.
Yeah, that's true.
The
Okay.
next meeting, again, the newspapers have been full for the last month about the various transit agencies running out of money. And the COVID supplemental funds going away and the state gonna give them any. And you've got BART and Muni and Caltrain and everybody else saying, you know, we're going under fast and we're gonna have to cut lots of service. Should we? Should we sort of stay on top of that family?
I mean, you can certainly talk about it. It's not something that we can necessarily do anything about, but staying on top of it and being aware of what those potential impacts might be to the town. If you wanted to talk about it, you can.
Yeah, and we have a regular Caltrain item, so if anyone wants to, has any news about things, then we can always talk about it then. Okay, doesn't seem like Greg will be back, so do I have a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. See you in September.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Pardon me?
Sweet.
I know, it's good. We actually get home for dinner, but I'm on the, I'm